I'm without my glasses for a week or so. They're, out at the lab getting new lenses. So in the meantime, I'm I'm doing the reader life, which I can't say I like very much. Anyway, I'm going to do a lot of this. I apologize ahead of time, but just, part of being my age, I guess. Anyway, we've been talking about elders and then deacons. And one of the things I haven't really addressed yet is something that I see happening. And frankly, I've made my mind up about what I think about it. Here's what I see. Lots and lots and lots of churches about 20 years ago began investigating and then acting on, working with the idea that the old system was you had the elders and you had the deacons, and elders would meet once a month or so. The deacons would meet probably about the same, maybe not, but then once a month they'd get together as the board, and they would vote on stuff. They'd look at what's happening in the church, and just my interpretation of it, it was kind of like a miniature Congress where you had the elders as the Senate and the deacons as the House of Representatives, right? There are more deacons than there were elders. But the elders, you know what? They had a weighted vote. And it kind of worked. It's not my favorite model. I don't, honestly, I don't think it's anti-biblical, but it's kind of unbiblical. Here's what I mean by that. I think the biblical model is that let me just back up and say, I think the biblical model for the church is the model of a healthy, functioning family. So that automatically makes it really difficult because our culture is kind of unfamiliar with healthy, functioning families. We've been kind of indoctrinated with the idea that every family is dysfunctional. It's just that some are less dysfunctional than others. Well, I guess that's true. I mean, one time I spent a couple of years going through the book of Genesis looking for a good, really good, maybe model family. And here was my conclusion. There ain't one. All of the families in the book of Genesis are pretty messed up, and some profoundly so. So what's the message I got from that? Well, it is God, because of who God is and how he does things. He doesn't need perfect families to accomplish his perfect design. He uses the imperfect. And so from that, I am not discouraged about the model for the church being that of a healthy, functioning family. Okay, this health and the functionality of families are on a continuum. I'll give you that. That's just true. And the more healthy and the more out of that health comes function, the more healthy and the more functional a family is, the more effective they are in the world that they exist in. This is true of the church as well. Now, with that in place, and boy, could I go a long time more on that, because I really do believe there is pretty significant theology attached to family systems thought when it comes to the church and how it functions within the world. Well, okay. But one of the things that I think is important, I don't know that it's the most important thing, but one of the things I think is very important is how God organized in the New Testament his family, the church. He did it with what, and here in 1 Timothy 3, we get a really, I think the strongest, most fleshed out look at the kinds of people that we're looking for to fill the roles of leadership and service within the church. We have the elders. They are the older siblings, and I'm going to use the strict interpretation that because when Paul wrote this, inspired by the Holy Spirit, he used masculine terms for elder. The assumption was that these people would be men. At another time, I might get into the whole idea of, can women fill this role, or is it exclusively a male thing? Well, I'm going to just leave it at the idea that the text itself so strongly implies that it's a male position that I'm going to stay with that for now. That's chicken's way out of saying, I'm not going to wade into this right now, maybe later. But the older siblings who are selected and designated to lead the family, it's not about, they succeeded in their business, so we're going to make them a leader of this church family. No, it's not even that they're the best educated. No, and these things don't exclude them, but the point is, these are the older siblings, the older brothers who have the greatest character and spiritual maturity. They are emotionally and spiritually mature and men of depth of character, and their behavior among us and in the world demonstrates that. What about deacons? Deacons, in my view of this family orientation and organization of the church, would be younger siblings. And again, same thing, I'm not going to get into, so is that all men or can it be women? Sorry, I'm just going to say younger siblings who also demonstrate a depth of character, consistency of character. Their function, their role is basically described in the term that's used for them. Deacon, diakonos in Greek, that's one of maybe 5 Greek words that I know. Well, the meaning is servant. They are servants of the church. If you go back into Acts, the very early part of Acts, where it becomes obvious that the Grecian widows are not being served as well as the Jewish widows within the church family back then, the first church. They designated 7 men of character full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom to meet the needs of all of the widows in this church family. There's a little bit of disagreement. Some people think, well, they were the elders and they administered a program. Because remember, the church went from 0 to 3,000 in one day. And then it continued to grow and multiply. There were just the math side of it is that there were so many people, and of those people, there were lots of widows, and so it was more than a small group of people could administrate. And the apostles said, boy, if we have to do that as well as lead the church in this broader sense, they said, what we want to do is be free for prayer and the word, and I get from that also, and teaching, then we need people who can take care of that. Well, okay, these 7 men were designated Some people believe they were elders. Others, I'm in this group, I think they would have been deacons. Now, realize we're talking about pretty heavy hitters here. If you go back and look at how these 7 guys are described, these are not guys who just happen to be available, or they were okay with widows, and they were pretty good at doing stuff. They were full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom. Okay, the bar for their character and their spiritual maturity was very high. Well, okay. Now, today in the church, we've got to, I think the smartest thing we can do is carry the model and the intention from century 1 now to century 21. And there's a lot of opinion, I think, about how would you do that and what would it look like. Well, one of the things that has happened is I started here and never really opened it up, but 20 years ago or so, the idea of ministry teams, that we've got ministry that needs to happen, and we need teams of people who can engage their spiritual gifts to meet those needs. And so let's create teams, ministry teams, to do that. Teams need leaders, and these would not be elders. These would be what was traditionally considered deacons, who would empower and engage people, release them into ministry, meaningful ministry work. I think it's a fabulous idea. I still think it has merit and deserves development. But something happened within that. A lot of churches dropped deacon out of their vocabulary, and they just called them ministry leaders. I don't think that's sinful or anything. I just think, if this is just me, I'm most interested in Bible words for Bible things, even in our modern culture. So when a church has elders, and almost all of the churches that I've had experience with that now drop the deacon terminology, they've retained elders, and they call them elders. They just don't have deacons anymore. Here's I'm going to kind of make a little bit of a case for why we need to go back and call these people deacons, because that's what the Bible calls them. It's just that simple. Why not use the terminology? Now, here's why I think one of the things that kind of encouraged this thing to happen, where deacons, the term deacon went away, is because our view of how we designate elders and how we designate deacons is a very democratic model. We do elections. We don't just select these people, we elect them. And I've mentioned this before. We do it with a secret ballot. There's an election. We count the votes, and our bylaws give us an elder needs this much percentage of the vote, and a deacon needs this much percentage of the vote. I even know of some bylaws that say a minimum of this many elders, and actually, the bylaws I'm thinking about right now, they didn't even address deacons. It was all about elders. Okay. Why does that matter? Because the point is, you want to get ministry done. You want to meet people's needs, and you want to influence the community with the gospel for the sake of Jesus. I absolutely agree. That's the goal. That the gospel would go forth and that lives would be changed. People would be drawn to Jesus and discover a new life. They would discover life, their best life. Because your best life will always be found within God's design. I would like to suggest it's probably a good idea for churches to consider moving back to a more biblical model. Not that you're sinning if you don't call them deacons. I just think the Bible called them deacons. Maybe we should too. Okay, enough. That's my high horse, and I won't be on it next time when we get together for Soul Care with Stevie Boy.